One moment.
Thank you. I'm Bill Rudolph of the National Committee. I want to thank you all for this wonderful panel. You guys are extremely impressive. And I want to ask you, for American culturally, are we really in the position to educate the next generation of intelligence people? And if we are, how would you do it?
It's a fine question. Maybe I can take one stab at it. It's one of the missions of an organization like ours is explicitly to train the next generation of national security and defense leaders, and that includes intelligence leaders. So how do we do it? We have a cadre of military officers who come and spend a year with us instead of going to the War College, 05s and 06s. They come, they spend a year in our office, they write, they think, they don't deploy, they go home at night with their families, and they actually have time to reflect. And in the scheme of things, those are young officers. Those are officers who are going on to do great things. We were rewarded last year when one of them was very quickly promoted to general after leaving us, which was a vindication for us that coming and spending time with us isn't a career killer. And we do it with our civilian staff too, by getting young people. When I say young, I mean many of them have doctorates or have military experience, but young people into this pipeline and giving them an opportunity to learn, to find mentors, to make mistakes, which is important, but not catastrophic mistakes, not fatal mistakes, and then to go on and serve in government. In a way, we've condemned ourselves to a difficult personnel policy because we want everybody to leave. We don't want to stay. We don't want to hoard talent. We want to train it and then deploy it and spit it out. So, I mean, that's just a very parochial perspective from where I sit of the way that one institution can do what you're talking about. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. This might be a question for Ambassador Negroponte. I understood that when the National Intelligence Directorate was formed, it was really in response to the silo effect of the intelligence community as a whole in the government after 9/11. It was discovered that the agencies weren't really sharing intelligence with each other, and this directorate was created to really close the gaps to some degree. And I was wondering that in light of the Nigerian fellow who tried to bomb, the airplane on Christmas, this past Christmas, right, which apparently, according to the press, exposed some holes in that, sort of intelligence sharing capability, whether the National Intelligence Directorate has made changes or whether there were lessons learned as a result of that, or whether that isn't the mission of the agency.
Right. A couple of things. I agree with you that one of the issues was the silo approach, if you will, stovepiping in the intelligence community. And in a way, another way of saying this is that the former DCI, the Director of Central Intelligence, who had two hats, right? He was the Director of the CIA and he was the Director of Central Intelligence. And in his second job, he had these so-called community management responsibilities. He was supposed to oversee and serve as sort of the shepherd of the community as a whole. But because it turned out he ended up being so occupied running the day-to-day operations of the CIA, there was a tendency to neglect that second very important function. And it's basically that function, the community management function, that was the sort of core of the new Directorate of National Intelligence. And within that, and under the supervision of the Director of National Intelligence, there is this National Counterterrorism Center, which has 27 or 28 different databases pouring in there from all the different agencies. It's had people from all the relevant agencies represented there. And that's where this integration, analytic and otherwise, takes place of our intelligence information. And I do think it's improved. And I think everybody gets it in terms of the importance of sharing and integration. This December 25th thing, hindsight is 20/20 vision, and sometimes you say, well, we should have connected the dots. I don't know. What I've seen, at least publicly, doesn't suggest to me anything quite so darned obvious that it was something that should have absolutely been seen beforehand. I think there are varying explanations of that situation. It's not as if we'd had deep insights into this plot. This was the act of an individual, and there were various segments of information that should have caused concern. But could you say that the plot was happening right in front of us in plain view? I don't think so.
We have time for two more questions, one here, and then, David, you have the last word.
Jonathan Gumbs from the Department of History at West Point. It strikes me that what all the speakers have emphasized to varying degrees is the uncertainty involved in intelligence. And yet I wonder how you would square that with Dr. Nagel's contention, very much a certain contention as to how the nature of war has changed and what exactly the kind of strategy to counter this change in the nature of warfare is, and how do we plan for the case that these very, very reasonable assumptions in many ways, but these reasonable assumptions could be incorrect.
Yeah, first off, I want to thank you for that question. Did John Gentile send you down to ask that question? I actually, and this is a good time to state that we don't take institutional positions at the Center for New American Security. I would not state that outline the future of warfare as starkly as John would. I think if you look at the current QDR, the Quadrennial Defense Review, I think what you see within the Quadrennial Defense Review, John, I'll give you a chance to respond. I think you see a Department of Defense that's actually wrestling with this very question. And as a result, I think that a lot of hard choices were not made in this current Quadrennial Defense Review. We didn't set priorities as far as major combat operations, counterinsurgency operations, foreign internal defense, security force assistance. We're just going to do it all. And that's, I think that's maybe the easier route. But the reality is that I certainly don't feel comfortable. I can understand why the authors kind of punted on setting clear priorities for the future of warfare, because I think it is very difficult to predict. I think at the one hand, we probably are entering an era of persistent warfare, post-industrial war among the peoples, as Sir Rupert Smith has put it. But that doesn't mean that the old industrial state-on-state warfare is not going to be part of the future battle environment as well. So I think the tough thing is not so much with respect to intelligence, but in that uncertain environment, how do you set priorities as far as training and funding the force? And that is where the real discussion is within defense policy circles, and you've got a front row seat from the West Point History Department. John?
And just quickly, as a guy who was involved in the QDR and is now reviewing it on the independent review panel, I think that the Department of Defense has correctly decided to put priority on winning the wars we're in, while maintaining sufficient capacity in its view, in its eyes, to deter conventional threats and, if necessary, to prevail in them. And so, as any nation facing an uncertain future must do, we have to find the right balance between capabilities for the wars we're currently fighting and preventing future great powers from arising that can challenge us conventionally. The Secretary of Defense is judged, and I think his assessment is broadly correct, that we have sufficient capacity to do both as a nation, but there is enormous organizational culture pushing us away from change, away from adapting to the wars we're actually fighting, and pushing us to continue old, comfortable patterns of thought. And I think this Quadrennial Defense Review and this Secretary of Defense have done a great job in forcing some of the changes that I think are long overdue in making us better capable for the world we're actually moving into.
With apologies, David, I'm told that we absolutely need to conclude. So how about if we talk offline? Thank you, Ambassador Negroponte. Thank you, Dr. Schwab. Thanks to the National Committee and all of you for being here. Please join us next door for cocktails. Good evening.